All right, hello everyone. We are going to go ahead and give a couple minutes for people to kind of come on in before we go ahead and get started. All right, so we will go ahead and get started and allow people to go ahead and kind of trickle in as we just kind of get to 3 p.m. So Peter Davidson is here to kind of explore the economics for feature films. He'll discuss the state of the feature film market so that young filmmakers can sort of better understand why studios do what they do. He's planning to focus on feature films and the independent feature filmmaker in particular. And so we really think he's got some really invaluable things to say. And with that being said, I will turn it over to Peter for his presentation.
Well, thank you all for being here today and giving us your Saturday afternoon. I'd prefer to be doing this in person, but obviously we're still living in COVID times. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen now and just start. This is a rather long presentation, so may as well get going. So as Laurel said, this is called What They Don't Teach You in Film School, the Economics of the Film Industry. I've given this at several different film schools and at film festivals around the country because I think that while film schools do a great job teaching story structure and plotting and framing your shots and lighting and things like that, I hadn't really seen a presentation that explains why studios make the decisions they make and what the market actually looks like. And when I first started out as a screenwriter, and I'm not well known as a filmmaker, although I have made some films and I've appeared in some things, I was making the mistake of writing big budget tentpole fantasy adventures based on my own ideas, like I was George Lucas. And that sort of thing just doesn't work anymore, if it ever worked well in the film industry. So having said all that, this is what they don't teach you in film school, the economics of the film industry. So before I started writing screenplays, I didn't go to film school or anything like that. I got an MBA in finance, and I lived out in Los Angeles for 20 years, where mostly I did not work for media companies, but I did work for media companies like New Line and for some production companies and distributors doing financial analysis for them, which I was interested in because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I did make a movie called The Dryad Tree, which is presently exclusively licensed to the Shorts TV channel on AT&T. So I can't direct you to a YouTube link. It's 17 minutes long. It appeared in 18 festivals and it won some awards. I'm proud of it, and hopefully at some point you'll get a chance to check it out. However, if Laurel gives out my email address, it can still be viewed on Vimeo with a password. And if you're interested in watching it, I'd be more than happy to provide that. So this talk is for primarily the independent feature film maker. I'll talk about television streaming, and I've been giving this talk for several years. It's been at least 5 or 6 years since I first started doing it, and the environment has changed a lot. In particular, what COVID has done and what the long-term impact of what COVID will have done to the exhibitors, the movie theaters, still isn't known. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of historical information. And by historical, I mean most of the information I have is from 2018. 2020 obviously is an anomalous year. What this is not, I'm sorry for those of you that got an email, and I understand that Laurel got some miscommunication. I don't talk about how to finance anything. Well, at the very end of this, I'll talk about how to approach investors. But in terms of financing a student film or any film, it's the same as financing other things that are speculative, which means that you basically have to go and ask people for money. But I'm not going to talk about financing a student film. Okay, so I've been asked in the past, a VC fund is a venture capital fund, and do specialist VC funds invest in films? Can I approach a venture capital fund? The answer is no. Venture capital funds focus on technologies. They don't focus on something like a film. However, there are specialist VC funds that do this. They're called film studios. So Disney, Warner Brothers, A24, MGM, Lionsgate. You can consider these to be specialist venture capital funds in that they do invest in individual films. And they've recently been joined by Amazon, Netflix, Apple, AT&T, others that are commissioning work. They're already experts in distribution, marketing, and so on. All they're interested in is whether or not you can produce the product. But they are very hard to get the attention of. Every year, the Writers Guild registers 50,000 scripts each year. And if you consider that a person who's written a script will spend 4 or 5 years, maybe more, trying to pitch it around, that means that at any given time, there's 250,000 scripts floating around Los Angeles trying to get their attention. And this doesn't include the stuff that the studios themselves commission. So they're very, very hard to get the attention of. And for very good legal reasons, they don't want to read your script. So they have gatekeepers that won't even let you in the door unless you're being shepherded in by somebody they trust, which would be a manager or an agent that they have a relationship with, who are also very hard to get the attention of. Okay, independent film. So it's very difficult to finance unless you bring the money to the table yourself. So 2 people below that you see, Mark Cuban, who is best known for Shark Tank and owning the Dallas Mavericks, and Megan Ellison, whose company is called Annapurna Productions, are 2 people that make independent films. And there's a joke that probably goes over much better when I have an actual audience. The old joke is, how do you make a small fortune in Hollywood? Start with a large one. I hope that some of you laughed. I didn't hear it. So I'm going to focus on Megan Ellison, Annapurna Pictures, as an independent producer. Somebody that you might look at and say, oh, I want to follow this person's path. She's 35 years old, and she has produced 20 feature films since 2009, when she started at 23. She took 1 semester of film school at USC, dropped out, and started making movies. And here you can see some of the movies she's made below. Zero Dark 30. She was an executive producer on True Grit, American Hustle, and Her. And her film company has focused on high quality dramas. So she's only the 4th person and the first woman to be up for 2 Best Picture Oscars in the same year. So here's some of her movies with Oscar nominations: 20th Century Woman, Zero Dark 30, The Master, True Grit, where she was an executive producer, Foxcatcher, American Hustle, Her. And you can see the tomato meter there as well. The average for those 7 films is 92%, 39 Oscar nominations. And that's already a career. And she's only 35, and she started at 23. Now, this is a pretty big and pretty daunting table. This is all of her movies. And I'm going to be referring to a metric that's on this sheet. I don't expect you to read this and understand what you're looking at. But basically, a good rule of thumb as to whether or not a film made movie is, whether or not a film made money, is, did it triple its budget at the box office? Now, the box office is not the only revenue stream, and we'll talk about that, but did it triple? That's the general metric. If it got double, between 2 and 3 times its box office, if the box office, the global box office was 2 to 3 times the budget, then it's kind of in a maybe territory. It depends on how well it did ancillary, how well it did DVD, how well it did licensing, that sort of thing. Did it have long legs in those areas? If it didn't double its budget at the global box office, you can be very sure that the production company lost money on the film. So here are Megan's films. The average is a 1.99, just about doubling the budget. which is just out of the range where you say no. At a 2.01 or 2.05, you can be pretty sure it didn't make its money back. At a 2.9, you can say pretty probably it did. But when you take out the executive producer credits, and the executive producer is somebody who just helps find the money, but did not actually make the company under their own, make the movie under their own banner. And here are the two movies that are her executive producer credits are Terminator Genesis and True Grit. Then her box office to budget multiple is 1.68. And you can say that no, these movies have in general lost money. And here are some of her disappointments. And I'm picking on her a lot, and I'm sorry about that, but she's a good example for this. So The Master, and some of you may love these movies: Foxcatcher, Phantom Thread, Main Street with Colin Firth, Downsizing with Matt Damon. Probably not too many of you love that movie since I didn't think it was particularly good. Catch 44 had Forrest Whitaker and Bruce Willis. It didn't even go theatrical. It didn't get into movie theaters with Bruce Willis and Forrest Whitaker. So how does a 23-year-old who has one semester of film school at USC drop out and get to make mostly money-losing movies over a period of 11 years? And some of you may already know the answer. Her father is Larry Ellison. He's worth $90 billion. So she and her brother actually bought, David Ellison actually bought the Terminator franchise. So Terminator Genesis and Terminator Dark Fate and a lot of other Terminator movies are hers. So the message here is that if your daddy, uncle, or grandpa isn't Larry Ellison, isn't an oil billionaire, isn't a software billionaire, isn't a billionaire, you need to look elsewhere for your money. And that's where almost all of us are. So do I think that Megan is a schmuck? No, I really don't think that she's a schmuck, but she spent too much money on films that have limited appeal. That was her biggest problem. She's focused on high production value, high quality dramas, which have a very hard time attracting people to the box office these days. So she's a quality producer, but she's not a successful film executive. And one of the films that she made is a movie called The Sisters Brothers, which is a Western called The Sisters Brothers. So it's already a genre that is well out of fashion and doesn't get much attention. And then the title doesn't tell you anything about what the movie is about. It sounds like it's about the Wachowskis or something. But she's not alone in terms of losing money. Martin Scorsese's film Hugo lost oil billionaire Tim Hedington more than $100 million by itself. One movie lost the investor more than $100 million. And I don't know how many of you have seen Hugo. I got to see it in 3D in a movie theater, and it's an astonishing technical achievement. It has issues. I have issues with the storytelling a little bit of the movie, but production value wise, it's an amazing movie. So Megan Ellison could afford to make a movie that lost money and then get to make another one. And for most indie producers, a few wipeouts will essentially end a career. They might get another movie made in 10 or 15 years, but when they go back to investors and the investors say, what's your track record look like? They're going to say, well, I made this movie and it lost money. So why is it so difficult to finance film? The system is stacked against the production financier. It's the first money in and it's the last money out. You take the biggest risk and you wait the longest to get paid. Time between financing and repayment can be 3 years or longer. And if a film doesn't get distribution, the investor loses everything. So I mentioned Catch 44 with Bruce Willis and Forrest Whitaker. There's no such thing as a sure thing. You have Bruce Willis and Forrest Whitaker, and the movie didn't show up in movie theaters. Other issues that you have is that movies are not cheap to make. $2 million is a lot for the average person, but not much for a movie. And Francis Ford Coppola had probably said it best. He said, the artist needs a canvas, and the writer needs a pen and paper, and the musician needs an instrument, but the filmmaker needs an army. It's difficult to use a bank without guarantees from distributors or film commissions offering tax credits. So if you wanted to do almost any other kind of business, if you wanted to buy McDonald's or build a strip mall or take over a coffee shop, you would go to a bank and say, hey, can you lend me money? I'm putting in X%, can you lend me the rest? Filmmakers have to find equity financing, which is the hardest to find and the most expensive. And even if you know an oil billionaire, it isn't easy. I know one, and he never finances anything that I send him. So what about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, other crowdfunding sites? This is the equivalent of the advanced sales of DVDs, downloads, paraphernalia, things like that. I think it's a great idea, but there are literally thousands of projects trying to raise money out there, and the ones that get the most support have famous names attached already. Now, it's been a while since I heard a crowdfunding site that got millions and millions of dollars for a movie. Like several years ago, the Veronica Mars movie got made because Kristen Bell and the other people from went on to either Kickstarter or Indiegogo, I can't remember which one, and people flocked to it and gave $50, $100, $75, whatever, at different levels, and they raised $8 million in 24 hours. Doesn't seem to happen that much anymore. And if you go onto those sites and you look for films, you're going to see thousands and thousands of people that are trying to raise money that way. So there's a lot of competition. So you got to think small with them. And my own experience, I raised $9,000 for the Dryad Tree using a crowdfunding site. My own experience was that put it up there. I hired a social media team to go out there, and it still was the people that I knew that gave me money. There was almost no money coming from people on the outside. So think small, use it in conjunction with grants, credits, and so forth. All right, state tax credits and subsidies. This is another way to cover part of your budget. And yes, you can get a bank loan against these credits. It's not impossible. But you have to discern early which commissions like what kind of films. This is a very bureaucratic process with a lot of legal documentation. When you go in and you ask for government money of any kind, you've got to be able to document and provide a lot of paperwork, which is a hassle. It's a very bureaucratic process. In the case of New Mexico, for instance, you have to go to you have to go to the state capitol and you have to make a presentation in front of the commission in public. Subsidies and credits change on an annual basis. So Michigan, Iowa, and North Carolina used to have very progressive subsidies that are now gone. The state of Alaska had the best one. The state of Alaska had a 50% subsidy, which went up, a 50% tax credit, which actually went up if you shot out of season and out of anchorage. You could get up to 2/3 of your budget basically covered by that. If you were to say, shoot a movie about a guy being chased by a polar bear, which, because you're shooting in winter in Alaska, this is the kind of film that you're going to be shooting. You have to have something that is in the Arctic. What happened with that was that the price of oil dropped and the government of Alaska completely cut the subsidy. It's gone. So for those of us here in Missouri and Southern Illinois, Missouri does have a small credit doesn't have a small credit, but the small credit that we used to have, which is $4.5 million cap, is back on the table. We're hoping that it will go forward. It's in Jefferson City now and being discussed. Illinois has a relatively decent one, and it's even better in Southern Illinois. It can be up to 35% if you're using people out of Edwardsville and Collinsville and Belleville and so on, and you shoot over there. Most producers won't leave California to take advantage of a tax credit unless the budget's greater than $5 million. So even if Mississippi is offering a good tax credit, the issue that they get if they're going someplace is that trying to find crew, trying to find actors becomes extremely difficult if you go someplace like Mississippi, or, they think Missouri, that if there's a tax credit, they're going to take advantage of. So it doesn't really become worth their while until the budget gets high enough to where it's going to make a difference. And this is even changing more now because California and New York State and New York City are all offering pretty decent tax credits to keep the productions there. So this is a cash flow example of a theatrical release. I'm going to throw some numbers at you pretty quickly. Let's say you're going to make a movie and the budget is $5 million. You find a distributor that gets excited about the project and they're putting in $10 million for prints and advertising. Although prints and advertising is kind of an outmoded term since prints don't get sent out anymore. And what they're going to get back is their stake plus 20%. So they're going to get back 12 million before distributions to the producer and the filmmaker. So they're going to invest 10 million in advertising, but the first 12 million that comes back from the exhibitors goes to them. And in addition, they also get 20% of the net that comes back from the exhibitors. The exhibitor being the movie theater. And the movie theater will take 40% of the box office. And this is all an example. It can range. If Disney is releasing a big budget Marvel movie or Pixar movie, the exhibitor is going to get a lot less than 40%. For a small indie film, they're probably going to take 50%, but I'm just using 40% as an example. So you made a movie for 5 million. You've raised 5 million. You've got a distributor putting 10 million into advertising behind it. And this is what the waterfall looks like. So you make your movie, $5 million expenditure. Your distributor finances the release, $10 million in prints and advertising, $30 million box office for the United States. So the exhibitors take their 40% back, that's 12 million, and they send 18 million back to the distributor. Now the distributor takes their costs back, their cost plus back, which is the 10 million they put in plus the 20% on top of that they're entitled to take back, which is 12 million. Plus they're taking 20% of the net. And that 20% of the net is not what's left after they take their 12 million. The 20% of the net is the 20% of the 18 million that came back, which is 3.6 million. And then they return what's left to you as a producer, which is 2.4 million. So you're saying, wait a minute. I made a $5 million movie and it did 30 million at the domestic box office and I only got back half of my money. Well, okay, you still have the ancillary revenue streams and international, so it's not like you've automatically lost money. But what this example is used to do is to show how the producer and why the production financier are in the riskiest situation. They're last in line for the money unless they have the power to make a special deal. Like imagine Ron Howard's company in the 90s had a percentage of gross, straight up, even though they were not a distributor. Now, the distributors sometimes offer advances or guaranteed minimums, but that happens less and less often. Back in the 90s and the 80s, companies could raise money for production by getting a guarantee from a distributor that would cover the budget up front. It doesn't happen anymore, or it happens extremely rarely. So here are the ancillary revenue streams that you get from film. Home video, DVD, which has collapsed. Pay-per-view and online rental, iTunes, Amazon, Google, YouTube sometimes. Streaming services, Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu, these have become dominant. Cable TV is suffering. Network TV, licensing to network TV is not strong now. TV syndication, which would be your independent TV channels, is extremely weak, and international basically follows as above. So why was DVD was incredibly important to filmmakers until it started to go away. It used to gross more than twice the theatrical box office. Now you can count on maybe 25% from DVD for a film, if that much. Blockbuster and Hollywood Video are gone. The sales outlets now are Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Amazon, online retailers for selling DVDs. I don't know how many of you who have bought a DVD in the past 12 months. DVDs used to be the place the $1 to $10 million movie could make a profit without going theatrical. So if you remember back in the days, even in the closing days of Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, you'd walk in and you'd see a 6th American Pie movie or a 4th Road Trip movie or another Bring It On movie. And these are movies that were made with decent production values, $5 to $6 million budget. You'd have a Hayden Panettiere in them or somebody, you'd have a few people that were well known in these movies. Some of them were even good. They never went theatrical. They were never intended to go theatrical. They were just intended to go to Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, sell through at Walmart, that sort of thing to a focused audience. And they could make money that way. In fact, they made more money for their studios by not going theatrical because going theatrical was extremely expensive. That's gone now that DVD is gone. Over $1 million budget, films must go theatrical to make a profit, meaning a giant investment in an ad campaign, or be dependent on a really good sale to a streaming service. So airtime on Thursday night television, billboards, radio ads, online ads, these cost a lot of money. And another thing that makes this especially bad for the independent feature film is that DVD is a feature film sales media. It is not a TV series sales media. If you look at the top DVD sellers from the period when DVD was still dominant, very few of the top 100 would be, you might see occasionally Band of Brothers box set or Sex and the City box set or Friends box set, but it was almost always the feature film. It was not television. And streaming, Netflix, Hulu, Prime Video, and the other services are more important to TV series. It's more of a television series kind of medium. So looking at the collapse of DVD, this is numbers from 2012 to 2017. You can see in 2012, and this is combined between Blu-ray and DVD. In 2012, and this is already down from 2007, which was the peak year, 200 million units were sold, $4 billion in consumer spending, 3.7 billion in consumer spending for the top 100 titles. By 2017, only 5 years later, it had fallen by 50%. And in 2007, the top 100 discs grossed 6.18 billion in retail sales, and total sales and rentals for DVDs in 2007 was 23 billion, which was more than twice the domestic box office. So this was a really, really important way for filmmakers to make their money. One area still does well on DVD, children's animation. Frozen grossed 334 million in 1 year on disc media sales in 2014. That's almost twice as high as any other title from 2012 to 2018. And that fact, more than anything, explains why this has happened. So in case you're wondering, why do they keep on doing this? It's because these things sell on DVD to parents who want to show their kids something. Traditional release windows are now a thing of the past. This is the way it used to be. Up until about the financial crisis of 2008, you'd see theatrical release going from months 1 to 3. About 3 months after a movie left the movie theaters, you'd start seeing it appear in a Blockbuster, a Hollywood Video for rental, sales in Walmart, and then it'd get onto HBO by month 13. Network television might have a chance to license and show it on CBS's Movie of the Week or whatever they were doing about 2 years after release. And then TBS and USA and all these other cable channels that show a lot of movies would start licensing it about 3 years after it had appeared. And international used to stagger about 6 months after domestic, but this traditional release window isn't going away, it's gone away. Theatrical, pay-per-view, and video on demand happens at the same time. Everything else moving month 4 onward. And it's not just a simultaneous release worldwide. Very often the movie studios will release their movies in foreign markets, particularly Asia, before they release in the United States. The reason being because of piracy. If they release the movie here, somebody will shoot on a screen. They'll put it on video CDs or video DVDs. They'll burn whatever they can, and it'll be selling in places like Bangkok and Hong Kong and Macau and China before it can ever reach movie theaters. So they actually release in Asia before they release here. This is back when we had movie theaters before COVID. So once again, I'm talking in the world that existed up until about December 2019. So movie releases are actually up, but studio releases are down. So more than 750 narrative films, I'm saying were being released into movie theaters each year, which is an increase over historical norms. This doesn't include the fact that about another 180 documentaries go out there, and there are many more small limited releases. A much smaller percentage of studio films. Studios are concentrating on blockbusters that have a worldwide appeal, animation, or films like Paranormal Activity. So this is going to be this whole talk, I guess, is a little bit daunting for the person trying to break into the film industry, and this is one of the reasons why. You've got 114. This is from 2018. You've got 114 different distributors tracked with I've got to about 930 different movies, and the top 10 distributors, representing about 16% of the films, have 90% of the market share. 10% of the market share is made up by companies that released almost 800 films. So the small distributors and the sales agents have been closing for years, and prior to Harvey Weinstein's totally deserved takedown, they were focusing on TV products. They actually had a lot of films in their library with major stars that they could not get distributed. Now, if you thought that the last graphic was disappointing, this is probably going to be even more disappointing. So of those 157 studio films that made up 90% of the domestic box office in 2018 rather, the top 20 films had 48%. So if you're looking at the 11.5 billion in box office for 2018, of the 930 films, the top 20 films took 48% of that. The median film in 2018, the median meaning the point at which above you did was 77K in box office. So even though you can say, oh, there was a box office of 11.6 billion, 11.5, 11.6 billion in the United States in 2018, and there was 930 movies distributed, which means the average box office was 13 million for film. If you go down all the information that's there, you will see that that film in the middle, at about the 400th film, did about 80 grand at the box office, and then once you got below that, it was less. So that's what I mean by median. I'm sorry if I'm so the average in terms of your business planning, the average of 13 million doesn't count. Now, international has become much, much more important. This is something that you're probably aware of. The United States box office has remained relatively static for the past, it's close to non-growing. Whereas the international box office, you can see in 2007, 16.6 billion for international, and 9.6 billion for the US and Canada. In 2018, it was up to 29.2 billion internationally, and the US and Canada was only 11.9. And this is another graphical view. So you can see how much international is growing relative to the United States. So what this shows is what CAGR is compound annual growth rate. So between 2007 and 2018, the US and Canada had an annual growth rate in the box office of 2%. International's annual growth rate in box office was 5.3%. And the number of people attending films and movie theaters in the United States has absolutely flatlined. In 1995, there were 1.22 billion tickets sold. In 2016, 1.22 billion tickets sold. And the difference is that in 1995, I think that our population was about 275 million. And by 2016, it was close to 330 million. So people in the United States aren't going to the movie theaters as often. And the market really isn't growing. All growth is foreign, particularly in Asia, where there's been 57% growth. China may have already eclipsed us as the single largest box office in the world. This explains more than anything why studios are producing fewer films and making more of them as big special effects extravaganzas. So there's two types of films that have been making money theatrically. The special effects extravaganzas, usually sci-fi or fantasy, that will sell well internationally. And then the micro-budget genre films that make money on the fringes, the Paranormal Activities, if you want to go back, the Blair Witch type of things. Everything in the middle has a much harder time making its money back, and I would point to Annapurna, even though Annapurna's focus has been drama, as an example of the kinds of movies that have had a hard time at the box office. And of course, there are exceptions. R-rated or adult comedies like Ted or Identity Thief did extremely well internationally for a while. Ted was a gigantic hit in Japan. And for those of you who don't remember, Ted is the movie about Mark Wahlberg and his talking teddy bear. So why do blockbusters work? All right, they don't need a translation. Action and big special effects do not need a translation. And below you can see the posters for 4 bombs. Battleship, that's the Italian poster for Battleship. You can see Liam Neeson there in the foreground. Liam Neeson is in that movie for about 5 minutes. Then there's John Carter, that's a Spanish language poster. You've got a French language poster for The Golden Compass. And then you've got an Asian poster for Rampage with The Rock, with Dwayne Johnson. So they don't rely on culturally specific humor or villains. This is also extremely important. If you're looking at these movies below, Battleship, who's the enemy? Aliens. John Carter, who's the enemy? Bad Martians. The Golden Compass, who's the enemy? Alternate reality, theocracy. Rampage, who's the enemy? A bunch of big kaiju. So there's no place here where it's the Chinese army. Or something that could be considered offensive to one market or another. And these movies cannot be replicated by local film studios. So your local film studios can make your small family drama, they can make your small crime film, they can make your small thriller, they can make your small comedy. They cannot replicate movies of this size. They don't have the financial wherewithal, they don't have the experience. And they don't have a lot of access to the US market, which is still an extremely important market. And each of these catastrophes below, Battleship, John Carter, Golden Compass, John Carter still is the biggest money loser of all time, but it's not as big of a money loser as it would have been if you just looked at the US box office. So are we talking about films that were clunkers? Not really. So The Golden Compass, it only did about 60 million in the US, but it did almost 360 worldwide. The Warcraft movie, if you remember that one, almost nobody went and saw it here. People in China went to it like crazy. A couple Terminator movies, I mean, Terminator Dark Fate pretty much put an end for the time being to the Terminator films, but these are all movies that are considered gigantic flops. But they made more money than people realize because of the international box office. So the foreign studios, in particular the Chinese, are trying to break into the big budget arena, but the risk is huge. So Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets was a $180 million independent film. It was made by the guy that made The Fifth Element, very good filmmaker. He didn't do a particularly great job of casting it. The cast was it's not that the cast was weak, the cast was simply unknown, but it bombed badly. The Great Wall was a movie that was made in China with Matt Damon. It did very poorly here. It wasn't a very good movie, but it did well overseas. And Asura, which was China's first $100 million feature film, crashed at the Chinese box office and was pulled from theaters. Okay, so as film students, am I saying that you need to be writing Battleship and The Golden Compass and Rampage? No, these movies are almost always based on existing material, either games, books, comics, fairy tales, or myths. And this is a mistake that I made starting out when I was writing tentpole, big budget fantasy adventures. Like I said, like I was George Lucas, something based on my own idea. That sort of thing just doesn't sell. There has to be something behind it. So the top fantasy and sci-fi of the last 20 years, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, well-known books. Pirates of the Caribbean was a ride owned by Disney. Most of the ride owned by Disney movies have not done well. Pirates of the Caribbean is the exception. Batman, Avengers, and the Marvel and DC universes. These are comic books that are owned by the conglomerates. Transformers, Battleship, G.I. Joe, toys and games financed by toy companies. So Hasbro is the one that's been financing the Transformers movies, and they made a lot of money doing the Transformers movies, at which point other game companies and other toy companies started to get into it. And if you were paying attention a few years ago, they were going to make a Monopoly movie. Yeah, if you've got that quizzical expression on your face, how do you make a Monopoly movie? Yes, Ridley Scott was attached to direct the Monopoly movie. I don't think it went anywhere. And they're almost always developed internally. So what does that mean? That means that some studio executive pitches to the other studio executives, hey, let's make a movie based on the game Monopoly. They think it's okay. They call up the major agencies and they say, hey, we need a script written for this movie. It's going to be called Monopoly. Get your best people to come in and pitch to us their ideas, and we're going to select one of them and hire him to write it. It's not like they're expecting you to walk in with a script based on Monopoly. That doesn't happen. It stays internal. Okay, so the laws of gravity have changed. So there are new means of distribution now: YouTube, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, and Apple. And this is kind of the gorilla in the room that I haven't been talking about: the change in release windows. And there are a lot more opportunities outside the traditional realm of features. The agents to people who chase money only have all been moving out of theatrical features and getting into streaming and interactive. We still don't know what the long-term impact of COVID is going to be. A lot of theaters are out of business or in severe financial distress. In St. Louis, the Moolah closed and the Tivoli just got sold to a church. So we don't know what's going to happen with theatrical exhibition. It's up in the air. It may take a few years for it to come back. People still want to go to the movies. They're telling the pollsters they want to get out of the house and they want to see a movie in a big screen in a communal setting. But they can't do it right now. So we don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to change tacks a little bit, and I'm going to move into independent television, and I'm going to probably have to hurry up a little bit because I'm taking some time. So is there such a thing as independent television filmmaking? No. Well, no, not really. It's virtually unheard of for independent television series to be produced. A television series is almost always pitched to a network or now a streaming service, and they'll order a pilot or a season. Production companies and systems are not set up for financing the independent television series. Independent producers do produce pilots without having an order from a network in hopes of landing a sale to a network or a streamer, but it's rare. It could start out as a web series on YouTube, and then if it generates interest from there, it might get some network attention, or a streaming service might be interested. So is that strategy successful? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is one of the only series that I know of where they shot the pilot and then somebody picked it up because, hey, they thought it was a good idea. That's kind of it. And Mystery Science Theater started as a show on local television in Minnesota before being picked up by Comedy Central. There are a few other examples, but considering the number of TV series being produced now, it's minuscule. And there are a lot of television series being produced. A lot of them. There's so many of them that sometimes I don't even hear about them. The other day I was on Hulu and I saw that they had 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and I was like, well, that was an okay movie. I'll have a wait. It's a TV series. It's a TV series with Missandei from Game of Thrones, whom I will watch in almost anything. And I started watching 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which has absolutely nothing to do with 4 Weddings and a Funeral, the movie. It had nothing to do with it. And I got about 4 episodes in. It wasn't particularly great. Okay, what are the drawbacks of this strategy of doing an independent pilot? So a pilot isn't a feature. If you don't sell to a network or an international and get a series order, you've got no way of monetizing it. It's just a long, short film. And it doesn't stand on its own like a feature. And if you think you have an idea for a series, but you want to take your pilot and make it into a feature, you've got to remember that a pilot is not a feature. A feature is obviously a lot longer, and it has to be success as a movie to be considered as a TV series. So where is the yes in my answer? YouTube or other video streaming sites, you can produce a series and monetize it. It's available on demand. It can be binged and searched for. Here are the demands. There's so much competition. There's so many things that are out there already that almost no one has made money with TV level production values on YouTube. The only one certain to make money is Google. You have to get a Patreon page, and you have to get direct support from your subscribers to make any money to be able to continue to make it. And also YouTube a couple of years ago demonetized small channels. So I don't know if they've reversed this policy or not, but you had to have at least 10,000 subscribers before you could start putting ads on. And how do you get to 10,000 subscribers without having anything up? So you have to start out without any way of getting revenue, except for Patreon. Basics of TV economics. And this will also go over into streaming now, since streaming is what television has become. In the past, a series needed to go into syndication, which is 80 to 100 episodes or 4 to 5 seasons to reach profitability. And television production companies knew that. They knew going in when they were starting a series, if they were pitching something, if they were going to do Ally McBeal, or if they were going to do, say, Miami Vice or The Love Boat or what have you, that it was going to have to, that they were going to spend more money making it than they were going to get from the network, unless it became super popular and they had a revenue share on the ad sales, until it reached that 100 series level, 100 episode level, at which point it could go into syndication, at which point the producers have 4 houses with swimming pools around the world. And if it didn't reach that, the production company generally lost money, no matter how big a hit the series was in its first couple of years. Miami Vice is a good example. The first year, it was this groundbreaking, incredible, theatrically produced, wonderful production values, interesting cop show based in Miami. It was sexy. And this goes back a long way. Many of you weren't even born when Miami Vice was out there. And then suddenly it wasn't any good anymore. And it didn't really even get past 2 seasons, which doesn't give them enough episodes to syndicate it. And so it just disappeared. That's why network-owned series stay on the air years past interest in them. It was to reach syndication status. And if you're around in the 90s, you may remember that there was a sitcom called The Single Guy on NBC. It was dreadful. It was absolutely dreadful. And it kept on reappearing every single year. And the reason was because NBC owned it. They owned it. They needed it to reach syndication so they could make their money back out of it. And they were going to keep on making Single Guys until they could get into syndication. Now, that didn't make the series any better. And when it reached 100 episodes, and I think it did, nobody wanted it in syndication anyway. So well done. International markets for television. While shows like Friends and Seinfeld did translate overseas, most sitcoms don't. So Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, things like that, it doesn't really move very well. What the international markets are interested in is dramas, police shows, or sci-fi and fantasy, usually 1-hour format and very expensive to produce. Streaming has changed TV completely. The shows that work best in streaming work the worst in syndication. So serially told, you need to be watching them in order for them to make sense. So things like Mad Men and Breaking Bad, which are ideal for binge watching. That's why Dallas and Dynasty, which were the huge soap opera hits of primetime television in the 70s and 80s, disappeared once they went off the air. They never went into syndication because if you didn't know what had happened in the last 3 or 4 episodes, you couldn't keep up on it. But things like Cheers and Friends or Gilligan's Island or The Brady Bunch, or even Star Trek. Something that happened in one episode of Star Trek may not matter to, I'm talking about the original series here, not Next Generation, may not have mattered in the next episode. Whereas in Breaking Bad, you absolutely have to know what was going on. You have to know when Saul Goodman shows up, he doesn't get a new introduction. You have to know who he is. The same thing was true with Mad Men. Streaming has changed the ecosystem. So you're seeing some of the series that have gone out on Netflix and Amazon: Orange Is the New Black, Stranger Things, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Bosch. You're going to notice that all of these are serially told. They're novels. They're not television series. They're not like Parks and Rec. They're not like Community. Netflix and also these companies are spending a tremendous amount of money on content. Netflix spent $15 billion on content in 2019, which is more than the entire United States box office. An educated guess is that $2 to $2.5 billion was spent licensing features, which is close to 20% of the US box office. It's very hard to discover how much these companies pay per title. They're more a television company, and also that as opposed to the information you can get about the box office, which is public information, Netflix doesn't have to say, well, we paid $5 million to license that movie. Occasionally you're going to see a press release that Netflix is investing $200 million into this guy's project, but that information isn't generally publicly available. And there are more than 500 television series being produced each year now. That's more than twice what it was 10 years ago. 500 series. I already mentioned that there was a 4 Weddings and a Funeral series. I mean, really, with good production values and with well-known actors, and I'd never heard of it. And also these companies, they own their series. So Bosch, and I don't know how many of you watched, I think it's on its 5th or 6th season now, is completely owned by Amazon. And I talked to one of their producers. I went to a presentation that was done that had the lead actor. And I talked to one of the producers and I said, how many views are you guys getting? And he said, I don't know. Amazon doesn't tell us. So digital has absolutely eclipsed physical. What physical is VHS or DVD, basically. You can see in 2014, US physical DVD and the other was 10.3 billion, and digital was only 7.6 billion in revenue. Digital being the subscriber revenues that places like Netflix get. Now in 2018, the physical dropped by half, down to by 40% down to 5.8 billion, but I mean, I'm sorry, not digital, physical dropped to 5.8 billion, but 17.5 billion was being spent. In fact, the overall home video market, the overall market for entertainment at home has gone up tremendously. It was 40 billion only. It was 40 billion in 2014. In 2018, it was up to 50. It was heading towards 60 billion. So people are consuming, even before COVID, people were consuming a lot of entertainment at their homes, and they were switching over to streaming and internet. And the younger demographics prefer streaming 2 to 1, and it may even be higher. Netflix, YouTube, Amazon, Hulu, 67%. They prefer to see that as opposed to physical. And even though advertising isn't a huge thing for somebody like a Netflix, advertisers want young eyes. And something that may not get told to you in any media studies thing is that once a person is approaching 40, advertising doesn't work that well anymore. Although obviously there are a lot of drug companies that would argue that, because you can see their advertisements all the time for whatever, if you're approaching 60 and you have such and such an issue. Really, you cannot get the attention of a 40-year-old by having a cartoon rabbit eating cereal. This is something that advertising is something that works primarily on younger demographics. A few more notes on digital. The streaming services have been outbidding studios for projects for quite a while now. Netflix and Amazon, and this is a good thing, they offer a really great artistic freeing for you filmmakers, both for the 3-act structure, since like I said, Stranger Things is a novel. It's much more like a novel than it is like a movie or a TV series or even a mini series. And another thing is that you don't have to learn how to write for commercial breaks anymore. If you were learning how to TV write in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you had to learn a very specific formula depending on the kind of, whether you were doing a 1-hour series or whether you were doing a half-hour sitcom. You had to have your page-and-a-half teaser, which was going to be interesting or funny in some way, because then you were going to go to credits and break away to commercials for a couple of minutes, and you had to keep people's attention. And then you had your first act, and the first act had to end on a high point. You had to write up to a crescendo so that when you cut away to the commercials again, people would stay tuned. You don't have to do that anymore. It's not as structured. It can be a bit more organic, and I think that that's actually a great thing. That you don't have this strict formula of how do we get to this crescendo high point before we break away and you get the cornflakes commercial or whoever it is that's sponsoring the show. They're also much more interested in serials like Mad Men or Breaking Bad than one-shot films. So that's not good for the independent filmmaker, although they do make the one-shot film as well. Okay, so in this portion, I'm going to talk about how you pitch to investors. These are the things that you need to tell people that you're raising when you're trying to raise money for a movie. These are the things that you're going to need to tell them. What's the story and the genre? Who are you and your team? What's your education and work history? What are your credits? Who is the talent that's attached? And by talent, I could be talking about a cinematographer. I could be talking about an editor, but really, I'm talking about actors when I'm talking about talent. And without at least one name, a name being a recognizable actor that you say, oh, Harvey Keitel's in this. Okay, I know who he is. As opposed to Peter Davidson's in this. Wow, you mean the one with Ariana Grande? No, some guy in St. Louis. You need to have this name. It really is important. And a budget. You're going to have a professionally prepared budget. And it can't be your educated guess unless you are a professional line producer. You need to know line by line what things cost, because if you're asking people for $2 million and then you spend the $2 million and you need $2 million more because you didn't know what you were doing, you could wind up in a lawsuit. You need to have a professional line producer prepare your budget, and that's going to cost you some money. Distribution plan. You need to talk about how the film will be monetized. In the past, you had different distributors that handled theatrical and then handled home video and so on. Now your distributor is probably going to want to handle everything. And a license to streaming is now vital to make money because DVD can't help out a film with no theatrical anymore. It doesn't work. So what are the elements that attract distributors? Since really, aside from the people that you're pitching to make the investment, the people that are buying your film are not the audience that you want to show it to. It's the distributors. What's the movie about and what's the genre? How much did it cost to make? What do the production values look like? Who is the director? Very important. And I'm talking about a film that you haven't, if you're trying to attract a distributor, I'm kind of talking about a film that you're still shooting. If you've got the film that you can show them, then that changes things a little bit. And then once again, who are the actors in this movie? And why is the name so important? All right, the distributor has to worry about what the target market sees on the advertising, what the target market sees on the packaging, and who's its target market. Some truck driver in Portland, high school student in Indianapolis, school teacher in Bratislava, factory worker in Shenzhen, restaurant owner in Mexico City. They need to see somebody that they think, oh, this is somebody that I like. This is somebody that's been in stuff that's good. This is somebody who's in stuff that's good. So what happens without a name? What happens if you have nobody who nobody's ever heard of? If you don't have a great festival experience, you probably won't get distribution. In the past, that meant that you sold DVDs out of your garage. Now you put it up on Prime Video because they will let you put it up on Prime Video, but they won't advertise it. It will never appear in what they call the real estate, which is the front page. So you log on to Prime Video and you see movies you might like. Your movie will never appear there. A couple examples I give here are films that my friends made. The Grail, which was made by Kurt Volkan back in 2002. Road to the Well, John Sivak, who made this in 2016. Both of these are good movies. That they had nobody in them that anybody had ever heard of, and they didn't get any attention. So, will the name make my movie better? And the answer is no. Only the right actors will make your movie good, but it will make it marketable. So let's say you're at AFM, you're in the Lowe's in Santa Monica. You've got your film made. You've set up a meeting with a Turkish film channel, and you want to sit down across from this guy and you say, hey, I made this movie. It's just terrific. It did really well in festivals. First question is going to be, what's it about? Second question is going to be, who's in it? Really great actors you've never heard of, nor has your audience. Thanks for coming by. Have a great day. Have a great festival. Talk to you later. You only need these name actors for a few days, 1 or 2 scenes, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, that sort of thing. You write a supporting role, pay them $5,000 to $10,000. They agree to appear in promotional materials. And Bo Zenga, who's a filmmaker who's known as the king of pitching, has said that if an attachment isn't thrust, it's baggage. So if you're trying to get a movie made and you've attached somebody to it and it's not somebody anybody's heard of, then that is something that you're carrying on your back and is not making it move forward. All right, so I'm about to show you a scene from a movie called LA Takedown, and then a scene from a movie called Heat. Now, you probably heard of Heat. Heat had Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. What you may not know is that Heat was actually a remake of a TV movie that Michael Mann made in 1989 called LA Takedown. And the reason I'm showing you this is to show you how important good actors are to making your film better, because this is exactly the same scene. And I hope that the volume is high enough that you can hear this. Okay, apparently you guys could not hear the audio for that. So let me see that I'm making sure that my screen is. Apparently you could not hear the audio for that. Are you, can I at least find out if you're hearing if you're seeing my screen again, because I'm seeing my own face up there and I should be seeing the share. You can go ahead and put it in chat if you want. All right, let me know if, okay. I apologize, that was an important part of my presentation. If we were doing it in an auditorium, that would have worked just great, but unfortunately with Zoom, apparently it did not. So here's some actors that appear in low budget films. So names you've got there: Billy Zane, who was in Titanic, Christian Slater, Danny Trejo, of course, Dean Cain, if you want Superman from 1980s, Edward Furlong, Eric Roberts, although he's gotten more pricey, John Schneider, who was on the Dukes of Hazzard, Michael Madsen, who was in Pulp Fiction, no, Reservoir Dogs, I'm sorry, Val Kilmer, Ving Rhames. I used to have Tiny Lister here, but Tiny passed away. And there are other actors as well. No women? Well, for whatever reason, actresses lose their viability faster than actors. I don't know why that is. It's that, or they're pickier. I mean, can you get Alicia Silverstone or Meg Ryan? Can you get Tori Spelling? I mean, this is the same kind of level of person. Maybe, I don't know, either they're choosier or the roles aren't there, or they're busy doing other things, or they don't want to be in low budget films. Biling you can almost certainly get. Do some genre research. Research your genre to show that there's a market demand for it. And once again, you have to focus on, you can get DVD numbers, but DVD isn't important anymore. You're gonna have to focus on box office. So some sources you can use is boxofficemojo.com. Thenumbers.com is extremely good, especially for DVD and home video information. Studiosystem.com is extraordinarily expensive, but it might be worth it for Webster to look into getting a subscription, just for their classes, because the information on there is so interesting. And you've got to do films that resemble yours in genre, tone, and rating. So if you see sequels did extremely well in this genre, but your film isn't a sequel, then you can't include them. And I actually saw a business plan that said my movie cost $8 million to make and Jaws cost $8 million to make. And this is not too long ago. Jaws was made in 1975. And it was about it. And this guy was making a gangster picture, and Jaws is about a shark. And he was using this as an example of films that cost $8 million. Choose films from the last 5 years only. Don't cherry pick winners. So this is an example of some genre research that I took off of Box Office Mojo when I was working on a raunchy college horror comedy that was going to be R-rated. So R-rated youth comedies. And basically what I did was I took all these films that appeared over a 5-year period. I cut off the top and the bottom one, the top being The Hangover, the bottom one being a film called Miss March. And then without the top and the bottom, I said, look, this genre has averaged $60 million at the box office. And that was something that I was willing to stand behind and present. Use good sources. The MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, publishes an annual PDF on their website that regards there's a lot of different great information there about entertainment dollars. Thenumbers.com has figures on DVD sales. Box Office Mojo and Box Office Guru generally don't. But information about potential sales to TV, overseas licensing is extremely hard to find. Studio System, like I said, is a fantastic resource, but it's very expensive. And remember, and something that I need to bring up is that when you read that a movie costs $200 million or $100 million, or they spend $150 million, the studios have absolutely no statutory responsibility to divulge what their actual budget was. The putting out the budget figure and publishing a budget figure is as much a function of marketing as it is a function of there's no reason for them to disclose. So you can't really tell whether this movie that they're saying costs $250 million costs $250 million. Hard to say. There's no law saying that they have to disclose what their budget is. So what kind of film should I make? And I'm talking to you as students at Webster University starting out. Unless you're related to somebody like Larry Ellison, raising $50 million is going to be very, very difficult. If not impossible. Raising 5 million is going to be difficult, if not impossible. Raising $1 million would be difficult. I would concentrate on micro budget projects that are around $100,000, maybe up to $250,000. It's much more feasible to raise this kind of money, and the return to investors is safer. You should focus on niche markets and genres. So thriller, horror, small drama, comedy, that sort of thing. And I know that putting a budget that low into something, especially if you have to set aside $20,000 to get an Eric Roberts to show up, means that your film becomes extremely smushed in terms of what you can do, what kind of assets you have available. Thriller and horror generally move better internationally. So how do you keep your budget down so you can do this? Number of locations and actors is low. Multiple locations and large casts cause budgets to spiral out of control. So in the 80s, the entire thing of kids at summer camp getting chopped up by a guy with an axe. The whole purpose of this was because you got teenage actors, nobody cares about them. All they want to do is see the guy with the axe chop them up, and you're out there in the woods shooting a movie. Sex dramedy, 20-something chill at a lake house, talk about their lives, have sex. The Netflix sci-fi formula. You've got 4 well-known actors on a spaceship. One of them is like a level of a Kate Blanchett or somebody like that, and they're trying to stop some kind of cataclysm, and they never leave the ship, and they spend most of their time arguing or typing into keyboards, and you get the occasional shot of the CGI ship in space and maybe some star that's about to explode that they have to keep it from exploding. That's the Netflix sci-fi formula. Aside from the actors, it's extremely cheap to shoot. You don't have things like big car chases. You don't have alien invasions. You don't have period pieces. You don't have convincing explosions. As few stunts as possible, and bad CGI looks worse than no CGI. Good CGI is expensive to do. Well, it's getting less expensive, but it's traditionally been very expensive to do. So the end notes is that there's no secret sauce to success. You need to keep on writing, and you need to keep on making movies. An agent or a manager can help, but they can't make it happen. And the people that I knew that had agents and managers in Los Angeles never got work through their agents and managers. They got work because they went out there and found it. And then the agent or manager took their percentage. It's great if you have a team that's helping you out. It's great if you have people that are pushing you, but really people aren't going to grab your bootstraps for you. It's something that you have to do on your own. And good luck. And I'm sorry that video did not work. If it wasn't for COVID and we were in an actual auditorium, you'd have gotten to see that wonderful comparison of those two scenes. And I guess we can open it up for questions now. And we're kind of right on time.
All right, so what we're gonna do is, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and then we are gonna have you guys unmute so you can actually ask a question in order to kind of get more direct engagement with Peter. So Q, it looks like you had a question, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to unmute so we can go ahead and get that answered.
Oh yeah, thanks so much. This all has been really informative and really awesome. The presentation. I was just wondering, so I also wrote it down on the Q&A chat, but in this current issue trend and climate, so to speak, how much do you think it matters what location you're in or region? I know there are a lot of, talk has been going on about LA not being the central location anymore, but if it, whether that really matters. I'm also curious to know what your takes on film festivals in general, how important they are, and my feeling is that they're not really as valuable as how it used to be, because naturally producers and studios might not be really interested in anymore.
These are great questions. In terms of location and where you're shooting, as a matter of fact, when I moved back to St. Louis, and I moved back here because my family's here, but one of the things that I look at around St. Louis, as opposed to trying to shoot a movie in Los Angeles, is how easy it is to shoot a movie here, and how much production value you get from being in St. Louis, and how fantastic the architecture we have is, and some of our topography, and the fact that if you want to shoot a movie, they'll let you close down Olive Street downtown to make a set for a 17-year-old to make a 30-minute short and not charge you $20,000 to do it like they would in Los Angeles. I think St. Louis is a fantastic place to shoot. There is an ecosystem here that already exists that can help you shoot. Most of them are taken up doing things like industrials or talk shows or reality television. And there are several companies that I've reached out to here where they basically complain, hey, there's no movie making here. Oh, well, I want to make a movie here. Well, you're going to have to hold off for 6 months because I'm busy working on this project. So there is an ecosystem. Now, here's what the drawback is to trying to make something that's bigger here, is that you do not have a deep pool of talent. And in particular, what I'm talking about is things like gaffers, cinematographers, and especially actors. You can find the gaffers and the cinematographers, and we have rental houses in town that can rent here. Although one of the people that worked on my film, The Dryad Tree, was shooting something for BJC, and they had him fly into Detroit and drive an equipment truck down from Detroit because that's where they rented the stuff from. And then he had to drive it back and fly back to LA from there. So I think that St. Louis is a great place. I think you absolutely, it has gotten so much easier to shoot films because of the quality and the cost of the digital cameras that have come out now. Can shoot can shoot 4K raw footage with a camera that costs maybe $2,000. 4K raw is far better than what you need to show in a movie theater. I mean, 1080p is good enough for a movie theater. So I think that St. Louis is a terrific place to shoot. If you try to shoot in Los Angeles and you're not a student, you run into so many problems with having to get workers' comp insurance and finding a location. Whereas I needed a really nice house to shoot outside of for the Dryad Tree, and I had a very hard time finding it without somebody saying to me, I need $4,000 a day. In St. Louis, you go to Lafayette Square and you say, this is a beautiful house. Can I, you knock on the door, this is a beautiful house. Can I shoot a movie outside of it? Sure, when do you need it? I mean, it's a much more receptive community, where in Los Angeles, they're more like, oh, you're gonna make a movie, I see dollar signs. Second part of your question, film festivals. There are a lot more film festivals now than there used to be. And I think that, I wouldn't say that they're scams, but are they valuable? Wow, probably, no. There's only there may be 6 festivals that are really important, and it's like Toronto, Tribeca, Sundance, Palm Springs, and Santa Barbara get some attention. Berlin, MIPCOM or Cannes. But after that, it really drops off. And another thing that's happened is because of Film Freeway, and I hope that you guys are familiar with Film Freeway. In the past, the way that you applied for a festival was that you had to write away, and they would send you the application materials, and you had to fill it out by hand, and then you had to send them a VHS or a DVD. That was pretty much how it worked. Now, so that what that meant was that Sundance might get 1,500 responses that way, because it was really expensive and difficult and painful to do. Now with Film Freeway, you load your movie up onto their servers, you type in what it's about once, who's in it, and then you simply go through and you say, oh, I want to apply to this one. It's $20 and my credit card's on, click that you've applied, click you've applied, click you've applied. So what that means is that now Sundance gets 15,000 submissions, and Atlanta gets 8,000 submissions, and Nashville Film Festival gets 6,000 submissions. Now, assuming that they're going to show maybe four to 6 features and maybe 24 to 30 shorts, the chance of getting in is extremely low unless you have Michael Cera in it or something like that, even for Nashville. And is it going to get attention from the industry because it got into the Nashville Film Festival, the Cleveland Film Festival? I'm sure these are really nice film festivals. No, it's, oh, I won Cleveland. Doesn't carry that much weight. And you can spend a lot of money applying to the Portland Unknown Film Festival and the San Pedro Film Festival and the Fargo Fantastic Film Festival. Even though these film festivals might only ask for $15 or $20 for you to apply, you can turn around and find out that you've applied to 150 festivals and spent $4,000. I don't think that festivals are bad, but I don't think that they can really do all that much to you, that much for you. And another thing is, if you're not going to attend the festival itself, it does even less for you. You don't know how many people saw the movie. Best experience that I had was a small festival called the Wildwood Film Festival in Appleton, Wisconsin. My lead actress was from Wisconsin. The Wildwood Film Festival is for Wisconsin talent, and Appleton isn't a big town, and the film festival was a reasonably big deal, and there were 500 people in the audience that saw my movie. I got into the only LA area festival I got into was the San Pedro Film Festival, which was showing in a gigantic and beautiful 1930s movie palace that had about 2,000 seats. And I was in a block of 10 short films, and there were 8 people in the theater. So, and it was in LA, so I could show up at network. But showing up at networking in Appleton was much better because a lot more people saw the movie, and it was more gratifying for me. So my answer is kind of both a yes and a no. The film festivals can't help you out very much unless you really get into a top one. And if you're going to get into a film festival, I mean, it might be nice if it gets seen in Buffalo. But you don't know how many people are going to be there. And if you're not going to be there yourself, then it has even less value. Are there any other questions? Next question.
All right, yep. It looks like we have 2 more. And we are at 4:15, but we can take we can take about 5 more minutes to just kind of get these two questions answered. So the next one is from Rachel. So Rachel, I'm gonna ask you to go ahead and unmute so you can ask your question.
Hi. So my question was, since the financial side of film can be overwhelming, do you think it's important for a new filmmaker to take any financial or business classes?
Well, financial and business class has applications that go well outside the realm of film. So I think that it's always a good idea to learn about that sort of thing because it's applicable in so many places. I think that what you have to understand is that I think that long story short is that there aren't that many seats at the table, and there are probably 10,000 people who are competing for the same chair. The way that you get attention in the film industry is by making a movie. Writing a script is okay. Showing up with a script is okay. But showing up with a DVD or a link to your Vimeo site is much better. And get out there and make the movies. Get out there and make your movie. And if it's not good, okay, I learned something from that one. Move on to the next one. If this is really what you're passionate about, if this is really what you want to do. So the basic point of this entire presentation is that starting out as a filmmaker, set your sights on something that is feasible to do, feasible to raise the money for. Make certain that it's something that's marketable. Because you don't want to be sitting across from an investor trying to raise $2 or $3 million to make your next movie. And when he asks what happened to your last one, you have to say, my investors lost everything. Even if you don't say that, oh, I made this, it did pretty well at festivals. What happened to the investors? Well, they were happy for me. It doesn't work when you're trying to raise money. So that's kind of, I would say that first question is, it's always good to get education. Finance and business education is a good idea. Working on a film, you will learn more about filmmaking from working on a film than you will, just being in a classroom. But the second thing is the point of this particular presentation is to orient the people that are watching it, that are at your level, that are at the student level and may not have access to capital. What is going to work in terms of moving forward? And if you look at Chris Nolan's career path, he did a film called Following, which was astonishingly good, which got him the ability to make Memento, which got him the ability to make Insomnia, which got him Batman. So Chris Nolan didn't show up with the script for Inception and say, I've got this fantastic science fiction film. Chris Nolan went on and made Following. David Lynch made Eraserhead. It took him years. Eraserhead, I don't know how many of you have seen this. It's a truly amazingly surreal film. Eraserhead got him The Elephant Man. And the Eraserhead literally took him 5 years to make. It got him The Elephant Man. The Elephant Man got him to Dune, which was a failure, but then he made Blue Velvet. And then he got to Twin Peaks. So you always have to, you're starting off, unless your dad is Larry Ellison, you're starting off at the level they're starting off at, and you have to follow the path that they took. Okay, that was a long answer. We got one more question?
Yes, thank you. We got one more, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris Aaron to have our final question go ahead and be answered.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Hey, Peter. Great presentation. A lot of information.
Thank you.
I just wondering, kind of piggybacking on the festival talk, around the 2010s, when people started realizing that festivals were becoming a different animal, probably not so valuable, there was a mindset to, and some of the slides you were showing about niche markets with the sci-fi, the horror, and those kinds of things, that some of these larger niche festivals that were becoming prominent was more like a viable way to go than just your average generic film festival. Any thoughts on that or insight into that?
Yeah. I mean, once again, it's if somebody, so First of all, depending on the kind of film you're making, I think the Dragon Con will get you some attention if you're doing sci-fi and fantasy. Dragon Con is pretty good. I got into Gen Con and Con Carolinas. My film was romantic fantasy. Gen Con is attended by 70,000 people. I went to Gen Con for the festival, and it turned out that the film festival was in a community room in a hotel a few blocks away from the gaming convention, and nobody even knew it existed. That was a downer for me. I didn't get to go to Con Carolinas. I think that the Dragon Con is one that comes to mind. I don't think that San Diego Comic-Con has a film festival, but I used to go to the San Diego Comic-Con, and it got so overcrowded that I stopped going simply because you couldn't breathe once you got inside the convention center. So I guess the answer to your question is I don't know so much about some of the more important film festivals that might mean something. Horror fans are a breed of their own, which is why horror moves so well. They love to watch horror. It's much harder to get people to watch drama unless you have Kate Winslet or Meryl Streep in it, or somebody that they really, really like. Once again, there may be 5 or 6 festivals that are important, and furthermore, if they're important if you were there, because somebody may see your movie and they may like it a lot, but then the next short comes up and they may like that a lot, and then by the end of it, it's not like, well, okay, I saw a bunch of shorts and yeah, I like that one, but I never met the guy. He wasn't there. I couldn't get a poster or anything like that. So the answer to your question is I don't really know about the genre festivals. I wouldn't say that the smaller festivals aren't worthwhile to get into, but you won't get a whole lot of professional advancement out of them, even if you go. You just might meet people that are nice.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys for your questions. And once again, thank you, Peter, for coming to talk. This was a great presentation,
Yeah,
and we were really thrilled to have you.
Yeah. One last thing before I go. I have set up a writers and producers group here in St. Louis that meets via Zoom. We presently meet on Sundays and Monday nights. I have about 15 people that are in it. I am always looking for more people. What we're primarily doing is workshopping scripts. If you want to pass out my contact information, I'd be more than happy to get as many Webster University students in there. I'm looking for people that want to write scripts. I want to develop scripts that can be shot in St. Louis on a reasonable budget, on a budget of $250,000 or less. So I've already got a couple of your grads in there. Grant Mayberry is a member. Stephen Tronisek is a member. Sydney Russell is a member. They're awesome. I want to meet more Webster students. And I also act. So if you want to make a movie and you need a white authority figure, which is what I usually get cast as, I'm your white middle-aged man. I'm here.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. We have a Discord server, so I will go ahead and pop all your contact information in that server so people can go ahead and get in touch with you. And we'll ask some professors to kind of spread that around in like script writing classes and stuff like that, because that would be absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for participating in Kinematofest. This is our last session of Saturday. So we hope to see all of you guys tomorrow at, we have another panel and another keynote. So have a good rest of your day, everyone. And thank you very much for attending. All right. Bye, guys.